The planet Illyrian burned under the weight of the battle. A dazzling array of explosions painted the sky, as the last remnants of humanity's fleet clashed against the Turnox armada. Ships that had once been symbols of hope and defiance were now little more than burning wrecks, their crews consumed by the wrath of an unstoppable enemy. Captain Kira Thorne stood at the helm of the flagship Vigilance, watching the chaos unfold on the holoscreen, her eyes cold and calculating. "Status report," Kira demanded, her voice unwavering. "Admiral, we've lost 20% of our fleet already," Lieutenant Tarek responded, his face grim. "Their firepower is unmatched." "We're being shredded, Captain." She nodded, lips pressed tight. "What's our position?" Tarek looked over his shoulder, scanning the readouts with a glance. "We're cornered, ma'am. The Turnox have us surrounded. If we don't break through soon, we'll be overrun." Kira's gaze shifted toward the distant, ruined cities of Illyrian below them. The once proud capital of the planet was now a graveyard of fallen civilizations, its skies filled with ash and smoke. Humanity had called Illyrian their final stand, their last hope. And now, it seemed like that hope was slipping through their fingers. But Kira wasn't one to give up. Not now. Not when so many had already given everything to keep this fight alive. Her mind raced, searching for a solution, anything to shift the odds in their favor. "We won't break through," Kira said, voice low but firm. "We don't have the firepower for a direct assault." Her eyes narrowed as an idea took root. It wasn't a strategy for a victory, it was a strategy for survival. If they couldn't win, they could at least buy enough time to rally the remaining forces and strike back later. She turned to Tarek. "Prepare a full retreat. But we're not heading into open space. I need the fleet to fall back to the ancient ruins beneath the planet's surface." Tarek blinked. "Captain, the Turnox will think we're running away," Kira interrupted, cutting him off. "They'll follow us, thinking they've won. But they won't know what's coming." The ancient ruins of Illyrian were more than just a remnant of a lost civilization, they were a hidden weapon. Long before humanity's wars with the Turnox, these ruins had been a source of mystery and speculation. Some believed the planet's original inhabitants had possessed a technology capable of shifting the tides of battle. But no one had been able to access it, until now. Kira knew it was their last chance. "We're going to use their arrogance against them," Kira continued, her voice steady. "Set a course for the ruins. Prepare the fleet to move on my command." Tarek hesitated, his expression torn. "If we go in there, we might lose more ships. The Turnox won't let us escape so easily." Kira's gaze hardened, her tone sharpening. "Better we take them down with us than let them destroy us like cattle. Trust me, Tarek. This is our only shot." The tension in the room was palpable as the crew moved swiftly to carry out her orders. The Vigilance shifted course, its massive engines igniting, and the rest of the fleet followed in formation. They moved toward the dark chasm of the planet's surface, where the ancient ruins awaited. The Turnox forces, ever watchful, took the bait. Their sensors confirmed the retreat. Kira could almost hear Tyrak's mocking laughter in her mind, picturing him sneering as he ordered the hunt. But what the Turnox didn't know was that Kira had one advantage they never saw coming: humans were unpredictable. They fought with an intensity and a ruthlessness that the Turnox had yet to fully comprehend. As they descended into the atmospheric turbulence surrounding Illyrian, Kira activated a secure comms channel. A dozen commanders from the scattered remnants of the fleet reported in, their voices tinged with the grim understanding of what was at stake. "Captain, we're with you. Whatever comes next, we follow your lead." "We've lost too many," another commander said, voice hoarse. "How much longer can we keep this up?" Kira's hand gripped the railing before her. She could feel the weight of every life on her shoulders, but she wasn't about to show doubt. "We're going to make them regret ever stepping foot on this planet. Hold tight. Prepare for the next phase." The fleet plunged deeper into the atmosphere, heading toward the massive underground caverns where the ruins were buried. The ruins had been hidden for centuries, covered by layers of rock and shifting tectonic plates. But they were not forgotten. Kira knew there was a cache of technology buried beneath the surface, ancient weapons, perhaps even something that could turn the tide of this war. If they could unlock it, they might have a chance. The Turnox, overconfident in their victory, followed the human fleet into the planet's surface. They didn't suspect the trap. They didn't know that humanity was preparing to make the final, brutal sacrifice. Inside the command center of the Vigilance, Kira stood motionless, her eyes glued to the holographic map of Illyrian. The fleet was nearing the ancient ruins. The Turnox were closing in, just a few moments away from following them into the depths. Her fingers hovered over the activation button. "Now," she whispered. The ground beneath Illyrian trembled as ancient mechanisms long dormant came to life. The Turnox fleet, in their pursuit of the retreating humans, unwittingly triggered the first wave of defense systems buried deep in the ruins. Energy fields flared to life, and massive weapons turned on their alien pursuers. The Turnox were caught off guard. Kira could almost feel their confusion as the first few ships began to disintegrate under the barrage of weaponry. "Now, we fight," she muttered under her breath, a cold smile creeping onto her face. The battle was far from over, but the tide was finally starting to turn. The Vigilance and the remaining fleet pressed forward, emerging from the depths of the ancient caverns, weapons blazing as the first real counterattack against the Turnox began. Kira knew they were only buying time, but every second counted. And in that moment, humanity showed the Turnox just how dangerous it was to underestimate them. The fleet had taken refuge in the vast underground caverns of Illyrian, their ships hovering just above the surface of the long-forgotten ruins. Kira stood in the command center of the Vigilance, staring at the tactical hologram that painted the grim picture of the battlefield. The Turnox had been thrown off guard by their sudden retreat into the planet's depths, but they were regrouping. They wouldn't stay disoriented for long. Time was running out. "We've bought ourselves a few minutes," Kira muttered, her voice tight with determination. "But not much more. The Turnox are too powerful. We need to hit them hard before they adapt." Lieutenant Tarek, now positioned at the control panel next to her, nodded. "I'll keep the fleet in formation, but if we don't find a way to keep them off us, we're done for. These caves won't protect us forever." Kira's eyes narrowed. She was already calculating their next move. The ruins had offered a temporary advantage, but the Turnox would come for them with even more ferocity. It was time to use humanity's greatest asset, its ruthlessness. The ancient alien technology hidden beneath Illyrian's surface might have been the key to their survival. But unlocking it came with a price. Kira had already considered the consequences. The weapons buried deep within the planet weren't just advanced, they were volatile, destructive, and completely unpredictable. And yet, she saw no other option. "Activate the mining drones," Kira ordered. "We need to access the central core of the ruins immediately. There's no time to waste." Tarek hesitated, eyes flickering with concern. "Captain, if we trigger those weapons now, we might destroy everything. The fleet, we'll lose it all." Kira turned sharply toward him. "We lose everything if we don't act. The Turnox will wipe us out, this entire fleet, all of humanity. This is the only chance we have to turn the tide." The decision had already been made. The stakes were too high, and Kira wasn't about to let fear stop her. She gave Tarek a long, measured look. "Do it." With a swift command, Tarek activated the drones. The massive machines burrowed deep into the earth, their drills grinding through layers of rock and metal, bringing the ancient systems back online. The energy pulses from deep within the ruins vibrated through the ground. Slowly, a low hum began to fill the air, building in intensity. Then, a sudden burst of light shot up from the depths, illuminating the cavern. "We've got something," Tarek said, eyes glued to the readings. "The central core is online. It's a weapon. Captain, it's enormous." Kira's heart raced. The weapon wasn't just a defense system. It was far worse. The readings indicated something that could obliterate an entire fleet. The Turnox might be overpowered, but if she miscalculated, humanity would lose everything. But there was no time for hesitation. Kira clenched her fists. Set the weapon to a focused pulse. We'll target their flagship and as many of their smaller ships as we can. Make it precise. Understood, Tarek replied, his voice low. But you realize the moment we fire this, we're committing to a full-scale assault. We'll be fully exposed. I know. Kira's voice was steady, her gaze hard. Make it count. As the drones finished their work, the weapon's massive core surged to life. The hum grew louder, and the ship's systems aligned, awaiting Kira's final command. The Turnox wouldn't see it coming. They would believe they were winning until it was too late. Kira's hands hovered over the control panel. Fire. In an instant, the cavern shuddered as the weapon released a pulse of energy so powerful it cracked the atmosphere above them. The beam shot upward, cutting through the darkness, reaching for the stars. The Turnox fleet, still in formation, didn't have time to react. The pulse struck first. Their flagship, the massive, ominous ship that had been at the center of the Turnox force, was obliterated in a single, blinding flash. The explosion was so intense that it sent shockwaves throughout the atmosphere, knocking several smaller Turnox ships off course. We hit them, Tarek breathed, his voice filled with disbelief. We've actually hit them. But the fight wasn't over. The Turnox, furious and now deeply wounded, retaliated with vicious force. Their remaining ships regrouped, launching everything they had at the humans. The caverns above trembled as the first explosions shook the surface, dust and debris raining down. Kira's mind raced. They had taken out the Turnox flagship, but now they were being overwhelmed by the surviving fleet. Pull us out of here, she ordered. Let's draw them into the tunnels. We'll use the terrain to our advantage. The Vigilance veered sharply, speeding into the narrow, twisting passageways of the ruined city below the surface. The other ships in the fleet followed, maneuvering through the winding tunnels, making it harder for the Turnox to land effective strikes. But the enemy was relentless. They had numbers, and their ships were designed for this kind of warfare, close quarters, overwhelming force. Another explosion rattled the Vigilance as a Turnox ship fired on their tail. The hull of the ship groaned under the impact, but it held. For now. Reinforce the shields, Kira barked. Tarek, how long until we reach the secondary ruins? We need that backup. Not long, he said, his voice tense. If we can just hold on for a few more minutes, we'll reach the backup weapons. Kira tightened her grip on the console. It was a gamble, but the Turnox hadn't expected a fight like this. They underestimated humanity's resolve, their ability to fight dirty, to survive at any cost. Another blast hit the Vigilance, and this time, the ship jolted violently, sending several crew members flying across the deck. Damn it! Kira swore under her breath. Keep going. Do not stop. We're not dying here. The narrow tunnels offered cover, but also limited maneuverability. The Turnox had begun firing on all sides, trying to corner the humans in the labyrinth of ancient stone. Their weapons blasted through the walls, sending massive chunks of rock tumbling down, blocking passages and creating traps. We're almost there, Tarek called. The secondary weapon systems are just ahead. Kira glanced at the view ahead. There, in the distance, was the entrance to the secondary ruins, an enormous chamber, buried deep in the heart of Illyrian. Within it lay the next phase of their plan, another weapon, ancient and just as powerful as the one they had already fired. As the Vigilance and its fleet raced toward the chamber, Kira knew one thing for sure: this was no longer about victory. This was about survival. And humanity would stop at nothing to make sure they were the ones left standing. The cavern shook with a deafening roar as the Vigilance and the remaining fleet navigated through the crumbling tunnels. Rocks fell from the ceilings, adding a constant sense of urgency to every maneuver. The Turnox were relentless, their ships close behind, sending pulses of energy that carved through the stone. The humans were retreating, yes, but Kira knew better than to believe the fight was over. It was only just beginning. How much farther? Kira demanded, her eyes glued to the tactical display. Not far, Captain, Tarek responded, sweat beading on his forehead as his hands flew across the controls. The secondary chamber is coming up. We'll reach it in 2 minutes. Kira's heart pounded as she glanced at the crew around her. Everyone was on edge, but there was a steely determination in their faces. They knew the risks. Everyone had already sacrificed too much to back down now. Keep the fleet together, Kira ordered. We're going to need every ship in one piece if we're going to make it out of here alive. The sound of the Turnox ships grew louder as they closed in, their weapons lashing out in all directions. Kira could feel the tension in the air, the pressure of the situation weighing heavily on her shoulders. But she wasn't about to buckle. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. Brace for impact. Tarek called out, his voice rising above the clamor of explosions. The Vigilance rocked as another blast tore into its side, sending a jolt through the ship. Sparks flew from the control panels, and a warning light flashed on the dashboard. Kira's hand shot out, steadying herself against the console. Her crew was already responding, but the Turnox were closing in fast. Damage report. Kira barked. Shields at 30%. Lieutenant Mara, the ship's engineer, shouted from the back of the room. Hull integrity compromised on Deck 3. Get it fixed. Kira snapped, her voice firm despite the growing chaos. She turned to Tarek. How much longer until we hit the chamber? 5 seconds, Tarek answered, his voice tight. We'll need to be quick once we're in there. The secondary weapons won't hold for long without full power. Understood. Initiating Plan B, Kira said, her lips curling into a determined smile. It's time for the counterattack. The Vigilance barreled toward the entrance of the chamber, a narrow, jagged opening in the stone. The Turnox, anticipating the humans' escape, followed closely behind, intent on finishing them off once and for all. Just as the Vigilance entered the chamber, Kira gave the order. Activate the secondary weapon systems. The ship shuddered as an energy pulse built up in the core. The ancient technology buried in the ruins hummed to life, sending a low vibration through the entire ship. The walls of the chambers seemed to glow with power, the ancient energy systems of Illyrian coming to life for the first time in centuries. Pulse in 5, 4, 3, 2. The pulse erupted from the Vigilance, its energy surging outward in a focused beam. The Turnox, following closely behind, had no time to react. The energy cut through their ships, tearing them apart in a blinding flash of light. One by one, the Turnox vessels began to disintegrate, their hulks crumbling under the sheer force of the pulse. But even as the first of the Turnox ships fell, Kira knew that their victory wouldn't come without cost. The pulse had drained the Vigilance's energy reserves by more than half. The remaining fleet had also taken hits, their shields buckling under the assault. Captain! Tarek called, panic creeping into his voice. The Turnox flagship is still operational. It's regrouping. They're going to charge us again. Kira's jaw tightened. She had hoped for a quick victory, but the Turnox were resilient. The battle wasn't won yet, and she had no intention of letting them regroup. We're not done yet, Kira said, her voice cold with resolve. Prepare for another strike. We need to keep them off balance. Keep firing until they're completely disoriented. The Vigilance rotated in place, its remaining weapons locked onto the Turnox flagship. The secondary chamber offered a limited advantage, its narrow corridors and jagged walls made it difficult for the Turnox to maneuver, but it also put the humans at a disadvantage. There was nowhere to run. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, and Kira wasn't about to let her crew become the mouse. Firing now, Tarek announced, his finger hovering over the weapons console. Let's see if this works. The Vigilance fired again, a series of concentrated blasts that slammed into the Turnox flagship. The alien ship buckled, its shields flickering under the assault. But it wasn't enough. The Turnox were regrouping, using their superior numbers to close the gap. Captain! Mara shouted from the back. We've got an incoming flanking maneuver. They're going to surround us. Kira's mind raced. The Turnoks were adapting too quickly, their numbers too overwhelming. She couldn't afford to lose any more ships. "Pull back to the surface," she ordered. "We need to draw them out of the chamber." "Keep moving, Tarek. We'll lead them into the open." With the last reserves of their energy, the Vigilance began to reverse course, slowly retreating toward the surface. The fleet followed, their movements tight and calculated. The Turnoks, now desperate, pushed forward with renewed fury, unwilling to let their prey escape. "Get ready," Kira said, her voice low and commanding. "We're taking the fight to them. This ends now." As the Vigilance emerged from the underground chamber, Kira looked up at the sky above, a dark, stormy expanse filled with the flashing lights of distant battles. The surface of Illyrian was no longer a refuge, it was now a battlefield, and every move counted. "All ships, engage," Kira commanded. The human fleet charged, weapons blazing as they took on the Turnoks head-on. The gap between them closed with explosive force. Each strike was a calculated risk, every move a step toward their final victory, or their utter annihilation. Kira gripped the control panel, her knuckles white. There was no room for error. This was the moment. Either they won, or humanity would be wiped from the stars. "We fight, we win," Kira muttered under her breath, her eyes steely with resolve. "And if we die fighting." The war had entered its final, deadly phase. It was now or never. And Kira Thorne was not going down without a fight. The battle had reached its crescendo. The surface of Illyrian trembled beneath the weight of the fight, dust swirling in the air, and the distant rumble of explosions reverberating across the ruined landscape. Kira Thorne stood at the helm of the Vigilance, eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched with unyielding determination. The Turnoks flagship loomed in front of her, its hulking form a dark silhouette against the flames of battle. It was wounded, but still dangerous, still a threat that needed to be eliminated. "Captain," Tarek's voice crackled through the comms, tight with strain. "We've taken significant damage. Shields are at 15%. We can't take another hit like that." "Keep pushing," Kira replied, her voice low but firm. "We've come this far. We're not stopping now." The Turnoks flagship fired again, the energy beams slashing through the air with deadly precision. The Vigilance rocked violently, but Kira's crew held steady, their focus unbroken. The fleet, though battered, had rallied under her command. They knew this was the final assault, the last chance to turn the tide of the war. Kira scanned the battlefield, mentally calculating their options. They couldn't keep exchanging fire forever. The Vigilance was a formidable ship, but it wasn't invincible. The Turnoks flagship had its own weapons systems, and its shields were still intact, giving it the upper hand. "Lieutenant Mara," Kira barked, "status on the secondary weapons?" "Online, Captain, but we don't have enough power to sustain another prolonged blast," Mara's voice came through, tense and mechanical. "The systems are overloaded. We can only get one more shot." Kira's heart thudded in her chest. One shot. She had no illusions about what that meant. It would be a desperate gamble, the final move in a game where the stakes were nothing less than the survival of humanity. "We'll make it count," Kira said. "Prepare the secondary weapons. Target the Turnoks flagship's central core. We're going to end this." The tension in the room was palpable. Every crew member knew that this was it, the last act of defiance, the final, catastrophic blow they could strike against the Turnoks. There would be no retreat, no surrender. Either they destroyed the Turnoks, or they were doomed. Initiating, Mara responded, her voice steady despite the pressure. "Firing in 10 seconds. The Vigilance surged forward, cutting through the air with devastating speed, its engines roaring as it closed in on the Turnoks flagship. The remaining ships of the human fleet followed closely behind, maintaining their formation, ready to support the final strike. Kira's fingers hovered over the control panel, her breath steady despite the tension mounting in the command center. She had led her crew through hell and back, but this moment was different. It was the culmination of every loss, every sacrifice. It was humanity's final stand. 5 seconds, Mara called out. Hold steady, Kira replied, her voice low but resolute. We strike now. As the countdown reached 0, the Vigilance released the full force of the secondary weapon. The chamber inside the ship hummed, the energy swirling into a concentrated beam. The blast shot out, a brilliant flash of light that streaked through the air, cutting through the atmosphere like a knife through butter. The Turnock's flagship shields flared as the blast collided with them, but they couldn't hold. The shields collapsed under the sheer force of the energy, and the beam drove into the ship's core. The explosion was immediate. The flagship of the Turnock's armada erupted in a blinding flash, its massive hull disintegrating under the intensity of the blast. The shockwave rippled outward, sending smaller ships scattering. It was a catastrophic explosion, one that rattled the ground beneath them and shook the surrounding atmosphere. For a moment, everything was silence, a stunned stillness that hung in the air. Then the echoes of the destruction reached them. The debris from the flagship's destruction rained down, chunks of metal and shattered hulls drifting through the atmosphere, tumbling like wreckage from a broken star. Kira allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but it was fleeting. The battle was far from over. Captain, Tarek said, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. We did it. The flagship is gone. The Turnocks are in disarray. Kira's eyes remained fixed on the battlefield. The Turnocks were reeling from the loss of their command ship, but their forces weren't broken yet. The remaining ships were regrouping, adjusting their strategies. Kira knew they were desperate now, willing to throw everything they had at the humans in one final, futile push. Not yet, Kira said, her voice sharp. Keep firing. We finish them off now. The Vigilance and the remaining ships of the human fleet fired relentlessly, targeting the remaining Turnock's vessels. The Turnocks, now leaderless and fragmented, struggled to maintain their formation. Their ships fell one by one, the mighty force that had once seemed unstoppable crumbling under the weight of the human counterattack. Kira's eyes darted across the battlefield, watching as the Turnock ships were picked apart by the human fleet. It wasn't easy. There were losses on both sides, and the humans were still heavily outnumbered. But the Turnocks were losing their edge. Without their command structure intact, they had no strategy left, only chaos. Captain, Tarek said, his voice tight with urgency, we've got incoming. Another wave of reinforcements. They're coming from behind. Kira's expression darkened. The Turnocks weren't finished yet. The reinforcements had arrived, more ships, more weapons, more destruction. But Kira wasn't about to let them retake control. Reinforce our shields, Kira commanded. Move to intercept. We're not giving them an inch. The Vigilance surged forward again, positioning itself between the reinforcements and the rest of the fleet. The remaining ships, battered but still intact, followed suit, rallying under Kira's command. The final moments of the battle were a blur of weapons fire and explosions. The Turnocks fought with the desperation of a dying empire, but humanity fought with something far more potent, survival. It wasn't about honor or glory anymore. It was about making sure the Turnocks never enslaved the galaxy again. As the last of the Turnock ships fell, Kira allowed herself to breathe. The battle had been long, and it had been costly. But it was over. The Turnocks had been defeated. The silence that followed was deafening. Kira stood in the command center, her heart still racing, the weight of the victory, and the loss, settling over her. We did it, Tarek said, his voice breaking the silence. We won. Kira nodded slowly. The cost of this victory was unimaginable, but humanity had survived. They had fought not just for survival, but for the future of their species. And in the end, that had made all the difference. Yes, Kira whispered, her voice filled with quiet triumph. We won.